as Kelly mentioned, we're just going to go through some insights here from a recent ecosystem report. And before we get started, here are some of the topics we have set up on the agenda for the discussion today. So first of all, we're going to talk about the partner sentiment analysis, and I'll explain in a moment what do we mean by that and what the research we're using, what as it pertains to the sentiment analysis. Similarly, we'll talk about the joint go-to-market motions when it comes to the ecosystem and what are the best practices when it comes to developing those joint go-to-market motions. Last but not least, we'll spend a few moments to talk about GenAI. Pretty much no presentation or discussion these days goes without talking about GenAI. So we'll definitely want to take a moment to discuss how is GenAI impacting partners' business models, what it all means as partners think about the future of their relationships moving forward. So here's who we're going to hear from today. So myself, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Catie Merrill and Alex Demeule, as Haley mentioned. Three of us, we work very closely when it comes to developing all the ecosystem intelligence reports that we produce here within TBR. So what are those reports? Before we get into the content, I want to just spend a moment or two to mention the reports we produce, and that helps us to educate our view of the market when it pertains to ecosystem intelligence. So the first one is kind of what we first started about almost 3 years ago now, what we call Cloud Ecosystem Report. So we take 11 services providers, GSIs and consultancies, and looking through the lens of their relationship with the large hyperscalers. We provide updates, semi-annual updates on the relationship between those providers. We do estimates of their practices, the size of their practices, the growth rates, the overall size, as well as looking to the resources that those companies are investing to train and certify. And we really kind of take the broader themes of the market when it comes to data and cloud and understanding what's changing and how those changes are impacting the relationship between those vendors. So similarly, we are producing a report that's focused on what I'd consider like the front office of the market. That's an annual report, actually. We are about to publish an updated version of that report within the next couple of days. So that focuses on Adobe and Salesforce, looking at the market, the sales and marketing segment of the market. It's got a front office, understanding, again, 10 of the IT services and agencies that have a close relationship with those two providers. Very similar structure, the way the Cloud Ecosystem Report is, but again, the focus here and the content is oriented towards the front office and the implications of the application services, application software and cloud market, how it's impacting and what's changing in those relationships. Again, focusing on some of the quantitative data is size of the practices across those services and agencies, vendors, as well as the growth rates, as well as their overall size in terms of the headcount, certified resources, and trained resources. And last but not least, from the similar theme of ecosystem reports is the SAP, Oracle, and Workday. That's the newest report that we will be publishing in the next 2 weeks. Again, looking through the lens of 11 IT services, vendors, and consultancies. We just think about that report as more that back office report, focusing on understanding of what's changing in the back office and how ERP systems, business applications, human capital management systems, what are the trends in those particular areas, and how the services providers and consultancies think about those particular three SaaS and cloud providers and software providers as they are building their partner ecosystem knowledge and understanding to better collaborate with the services counterpart. So that's going to be the newest report. Again, very similar structure and theme around the practice sizes from revenue and headcount perspective. Again, it's something that way now we're going to have infrastructure, which is kind of like the infrastructure ecosystem. And then we're going to have two reports on the application ecosystem, the front and the back office. And then to wrap it all, which is essentially what we're going to talk about today, is the voice of the partner ecosystem report. So what we did earlier this year, we conducted a survey within the US. So for that survey, we targeted 3 groups of vendors. So within those 3 groups of vendors were the OEM providers, the cloud providers, and the services providers. And as you can see on the screen here, we kind of have a subsegment of vendors, and specifically which vendors we targeted. So we targeted people, executives within those vendors that are alliance managers and above, executives that can actually speak about the relationship with their partners and ecosystem partners and understanding what's changing. So the underlying question of the survey that we did, that we then augmented with some in-depth interviews on our own, was what are you missing from your partners? So that's kind of the big question that this report is answering. And we're going to dive deeper in a moment in some of the data that we captured from the survey. But what are you missing from the partners, and how you can go to market together better, essentially? So again, that went into multiple areas when it comes to commercial model, staffing model, revenue model, different client sizes, and so on and so forth. So again, this is that was the first report we published in the summer. A lot of good insights for all the parties that actually are part of the report, because you can understand how you stack up against your peers in terms of a sentiment analysis, as well as to create better, more outlook and the better go-to-market motions moving forward. Also for readers that are more of maybe tier 2 or tier 3 vendors that actually are trying to get up the stack and be positioned themselves in a better way with the larger providers that might be in the marketplace at the moment. So we're going to spend a few moments today to talk about that particular survey. So we're going to start with the sentiment analysis and part of the sentiment analysis. So overall, the vendors across the profile groups that I just outlined appear to be satisfied with their alliance partners, despite the differences in the commercial, staffing, and client management models. We believe the value of the ecosystem have certainly placed some pressures on the vendors to think creatively about ways to monetize opportunities with the partners. So thus far, what we saw was that the services vendors have demonstrated greater agility compared to the other groups of vendors, such as the OEMs, which often appear to be stuck in the traditional ways of doing business. One area that all vendors agree on is industry specialization, so which we believe this is the industry focus provides the connecting tissue, essentially, between the relationship. As clients, regardless if they're direct clients or joint clients, all are part of the particular vertical, which compels the vendors to either demonstrate their value through industry know-how or rely on partners. So that's kind of like the overarching theme of the sentiment that we capture. But just clicking down on the graph to the left and taking a closer look at what the data suggests to us, at least the way we interpret the data, is while there were fewer instances of unhappy partners as part of the survey, the infrastructure providers and infrastructure as a service providers and IT services providers appear to generate the most consistent and satisfactory experience across the ecosystem. With 79%, 81% respectively of the partner respondents claiming that they're either satisfied or very satisfied working with the vendors. What we attribute that high satisfaction to the vendor's ability to work with and sell through the ecosystem using embedded sales and project teams, as well as their willingness to take on additional risk to drive outcomes, using frameworks which resonate with the end buyers. The OEM and the management consulting and the big four vendors appear to have similar overall satisfaction scores, which we see as an area where these vendors groups could align further in the future. While their business models might not be perfectly aligned, OEMs are certainly rooting more of a transactional mindset, whereas the other two groups are more business focused. They can complement each other, especially as the OEM providers appear to be looking for partners that are better able to orchestrate the ecosystem as well as approach opportunities with end customer in mind, and which something the management consulting firms and the big four vendors could definitely help with. And last but not least, in a similar vein, the SaaS and the India-centric providers have very similar overall satisfaction rankings as well, which we believe give vendors confidence about collaborating more closely with each other, with the SaaS company's engineering background and the India-centric vendors' fee-for-service approach provides a really strong backbone for deeper collaboration. So again, this is kind of the satisfaction. We have more of a click-down view of each of the groups. In the report, we just want to kind of provide some high-level overview here. The graph to the right, if you look at what the title says, qualities of successful alliance by vendor type. The business model imperative drive alliance priorities with the OEM providers depending on process, cloud companies focus on selling, and services companies banking on trust. That's our kind of a big takeaway here. What do we mean by that? OEM providers like top-down and bottom-up alignment because they're product companies designed to follow operational processes and measure tangible results, such as how many products are shipped. They're looking for partners with similar mindset, or at least an appreciation of how OEMs see the world. Services companies' business models depend on trust. Clients hand over problems and expect results, making relationships critical. So as a result, services companies expect the same mindset and the value orientation from their services partners. Cloud and software companies need to sell and keep selling, leading them to value organizations and sales alignment to smooth the sales process and to go to market and sales support to add fuel to the sales process, essentially, right? So this is kind of like the three distinct ways of those companies think about what it means to them as a successful alliance look like. One thing I want to note here is that the services and cloud and the cloud companies do not expect much from their ecosystem partners with respect to communication. In our view, the low expectations stem from decades of entrenching habits across the technology ecosystem and may provide an opening for companies looking to stand out in the crowded market through well-managed communication strategies. So that's kind of like in a summary here of the sentiment analysis when it comes to partner views. The next section of the presentation today, I want to click down a little bit more on the go-to-market motions and what it all means through the lens of the ecosystem. Overall, mature alliances, partnerships have enabled vendors across the spectrum to collaborate as they realize the value of the ecosystem. With cultural, portfolio, and leadership DNA have shaped vendors' behavior when it comes to go-to-market efforts and partner strategies. Which is not surprising, given the vendors often lean on what they do best when pursuing opportunities. With new technologies, including the GenAI, influencing vendor strategies, we expect some new relationships to emerge, whether bidirectional or multi-directional, as vendors realize that positioning themselves as end-to-end providers is a thing from the past. We understand that the buyers will be the ultimate judges of these efforts, but laying the groundwork backed by a robust common governance and accountability will certainly separate leading and lagging alliances. Some of the data that we look into when we're thinking about the joint go-to-market motions, the graph to the left is focused on the preferred commercial models by vendor type. As I mentioned, the respondents prefer commercial models largely aligned with their vendor's DNA and overall value proposition. With OEMs leaning on transaction-based and cloud vendors prefer revenue sharing and deal size-based models that we believe are fueled by deploying typical cloud commits. Well, it's a little bit of a surprise that the services vendors opt for transaction-based commercial models. We believe this is due to their companies largely relying on partner technologies to expand their client wallet share, which is making them more appealing to the ecosystem. Additionally, the services companies' business models are usually split between time and materials for consulting and price fixed models for support-related activities. We can see how this mindset can also align with the transaction-based fees most respondents selected as their preferred model. And further, the services vendors' general risk-sharing approach is reflected in the respondents' preference for revenue sharing model and upfront deal investment, which aligns with the notion of these services vendors adopting outcome-based services to better appeal to cost-conscious buyers. So what we understand from all this data is that the adopting of outcome-based services might be hard for the OEM vendors and to a degree for the cloud partners to adopt, but at least being willing to experiment with outcome-based fees might strengthen the ecosystem trust and the ecosystem with the services counterparts. One thing I want to mention here is that, as we want to talk later about the GenAI, is as we're thinking about outcome-based in GenAI, we're starting to see some of the vendors shift their mindset, shift their approach from the outcome-based and how they apply GenAI to their business model, to commercial models, as a way to increase the stickiness with the clients. Certainly happy to answer more questions on that particular topic, but it's something that we're starting to kind of witness from some of the vendors in the ecosystem. And on the right, the graph to the right, looking at the staffing model. So staffing obviously is an important piece of the go-to-market puzzle, especially as some of the both from field salespeople to services deliver people are part of the equation. The OEM respondents see the value of having a team with complementary skill sets, including the dedicated points of contact with partners, which is not surprising because each party aims to demonstrate service quality and client support. This aspiration provides the opportunity for partners to invest more in training and developing dedicated resources that can also held accountable throughout each part of the engagement, from pre-sales to kickoff and delivery and post-engagement support. The challenge we see is that while all these vendors aim to provide top-notch service quality, many think differently about quality and have various starting points, frameworks, and measurement. Next challenge we see is that only about a third of the OEM respondents see cultural compatibility as an important factor when it comes to developing the ideal staffing model. While we understand it can be hard for partners to differentiate background with different backgrounds to see eye to eye, establishing those common cultural frameworks and guardrails that reflect the backgrounds and involvement of onshore and offshore teams can help elevate the value of joint offerings. For services and cloud companies, an integrated team embedding members from both partners ranks as the ideal staffing model, an option appealing to only about a third of the OEMs. So even understanding the complications inherent to the co-staffing model or embedded staffing models, growth-oriented OEMs could see quicker returns on ecosystem investment by meeting services and cloud companies closer to the ideal staffing models. Again, while we didn't outline the survey as a standalone option, we do believe the effect of the GenAI will have some of the vendors' business model also be impacted how those vendors think about staffing and going to market with partners. GenAI still is yet to have a meaningful impact on vendor staffing pyramids, but certainly a topic we're closely monitoring as part of our ongoing IT services research. We'll now turn over to Alex to talk a little bit about cloud response to kind of provide some highlights on the cloud side. Alex, over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Boz. Hi, everyone. This is Alex Demeule, TBR Analyst covering the cloud application space. So with my time, I wanted to walk through a refresh on what the cloud vendors and cloud application vendors specifically are really looking for from their ecosystem. Both of these graphs have been taken from TBR's Voice of the Partner Ecosystem report, as Boz has just mentioned. And I think they depict a story that has been fairly consistent for some else. Above everything, cloud vendors want their services partners to be building complementary solutions on top of their platforms. This isn't something that AI and GenAI has changed, but I do think that the emergence of that technology has changed what the specific development areas that the SaaS vendors want their services vendors to be targeting. Right now, we're at a pretty pivotal moment when it comes to GenAI development. AI agents and the commercialization of AI agents has largely supplanted all talk of copilots over the past 2 months. I think that Salesforce has been a real leader here, and I'm going to talk about Salesforce a bunch just because Dreamforce has been on my mind, and the Salesforce and Adobe ecosystem report has been on my mind. I think when we look at Salesforce as a case study in how they are going to market with the Agentforce platform, which is set to become generally available in October, they're really positioning this platform as a development platform. There are pre-built agents that are going to be available day one, serving specific roles that the company is going to highlight. SDR, of course, is one that caught my eye, but obviously a few there. But above all else, they're pointing to this as a platform for the enterprise to take the integrations with Customer 360, look for opportunities for automation within their Customer 360 workflows, and pursue the opportunities that make the most sense for their business. And alongside this, we see a pretty serious ecosystem development strategy focusing on the Agentforce partner network. And this is all focusing on, taking this development platform, making it available to both technology and services partners to go in with their niche, whether that be industry expertise or workflow expertise, and leverage that domain knowledge to develop agents on this platform. And so really focusing on that opportunity and giving the tools to the partner ecosystem to develop these complementary solutions around Agentforce, that really has been the whole strategy for Salesforce so far. And I think that aligns very closely with what we're seeing in our survey that continue focus on complementary solutions. So as we continue to go forward, I think that there's going to continue to be a really strong emphasis on trying to garner engagement from the ecosystem to take this platform and turn it into real value. As I mentioned before, and this could go a few different ways as far as when we talk about complementary solutions. Data platforms, of course, is one of them. And I'll save that one for Catie to talk about in just a moment. But industry use cases, business segment use cases, tooling for reporting and recording ROI from agent implementation is an area that is still going to be very important. One of the things that Boz just mentioned, these ideas of outcome-based pricing. For Salesforce, they are pursuing a consumption-based pricing method. Mark Benioff has floated around a $2 per conversation fee for interactions with agents. And so this is, in my mind, kind of ties into that outcome-based pricing conversation. It really only pays off if you're getting traction, you're getting employees within your customers to be interacting with the agents that are being developed regularly. And so really focusing on creating tools that can build that value and build that traction, and being able to report and record value delivered is a big part of that. So looking at ways to prove ROI is going to be valuable to Salesforce. Outside of oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought right there. I would say ecosystem development around Agentforce is developing rather quickly. At Dreamforce, services partners like Accenture, Deloitte Digital, Capgemini, IBM Consulting, PwC, Slalom, they all were highlighted as vendors or services vendors building on the Agentforce platform today. Obviously, with it not even generally available yet, there's still plenty of opportunity, and a lot of the solutions built on that platform are going to be coming over the next year and the years ahead. So this is a space that Salesforce, I think, is going to be focusing pretty heavily on. And I think that this can be extrapolated to the broader SaaS market too. Like I said, I think Salesforce is a bit of a case study for how to do it. And I think a lot of other SaaS vendors are going to be following closely behind. Of course, with GenAI development, there's a lot of prerequisites that need to be completed, data being one of them. So I'm going to hand it off to Catie to start talking a little bit about the data platform needs and how partners play a role in modernizing those platforms. Catie?
Actually, Alex, I'm going to jump real quick here before Catie join us for the call. Just one more kind of data point from the survey when it comes to thinking about the data part and thinking about how partners are viewing the opportunity that they have in mind for the next 2 years, essentially. So we asked the question, all three groups of vendors, what do you see the biggest opportunity for yourself coming from, right, in terms of a service, product, workloads. So interestingly enough, the difference in expectations around that, what will drive the business in the next 2 years, provide a really strong reality check that vendors' priorities don't always align with their partners' views. One can attribute some of the differences for vendors' place in the traditional technology lifecycle. For example, the OEMs try to accelerate the hardware refresh cycle and sell more infrastructure support growth in new areas such as 5G and Edge, where the cloud vendors remain focused on spinning the meter to support ongoing cloud initiatives. In contrast, the services vendors aim to secure those foundational revenues in markets like cloud migration and cybersecurity, while gradually paving the way for growth in data management. But despite the ongoing GenAI hype, all vendors seem to agree that technology will not be the predominant driving force for most opportunities in the next 2 years, which is a sober outlook, and confirms vendors' understanding of the complexity of the enterprise landscape and the need for demonstrating ROI and underscoring the importance of deeper collaboration. Some of the just to click down a couple of areas here for each of the groups of vendors. For the OEMs, 5G appears to be a top area for growth that they at least see and believe that partners can help them with. Is a broad area that can be the backbone for networking related opportunities, especially as GenAI creates new pockets of demand within the GPU-run data centers. While the service and cloud providers consider 5G to be a growth area, they've been investing in the required software and services somewhat marginally. So now it's not as aggressively as maybe OEM vendors aspire to. For the cloud vendors, and I'll have Catie comment in a moment on the data part of the equation, but it was curious to see how high Edge ranked for those vendors. Edge ranked number 4 as a growth area for cloud vendors, highlighting the optimism, especially as there's still a gap between the IT and OT buyers that challenges the Edge adoption, and the OT stakeholders, the operations technology stakeholders, understand the Edge, but they're not necessarily thinking about the IT solutions through the lens of their own processes. Because of this, Edge hardware vendors and cloud providers benefit from partnering with Edge native software vendors that have the permission from the OT buyers and can help Edge incumbents sell solutions, right? Including attached software and services. The dynamic between the IT and OT departments certainly reinforces the importance of the vendor ecosystem in the enterprise Edge market. And lastly, here on the services side, as I mentioned, services vendors remain focused on pursuing opportunities that drive foundational revenue. So just wrapped up the Accenture's earnings call today. And while there's a good momentum in the GenAI bookings, there's so much more focus on capturing those foundational revenues. I don't think Accenture is the only one really looking and thinking it that way, and that came through very vividly as part of the survey. With the data-related opportunities for the services vendors, which ranked within the current services respondents within the top 10 area for growth within the next 10 years, services vendors are also sending a signal to the ecosystem that they'll continue to invest in resources and guide conversations with mature enterprise buyers that are further along within the digital transformation programs, and they can embark on the next phase, which is essentially setting up a strong foundation for GenAI. So without turning it over to Catie, who can talk a little bit more about how she thinks and looks into the world of data and all things data. Go ahead, Catie.
Okay, thanks, Boz, and thank you everyone for staying with us. So as you just heard, it's a pretty broad view in terms of how the different groups of vendors look at partner-led growth. And so for the cloud guys, as Boz just mentioned, data strategy and data management really stuck out. And I wouldn't say that's surprising to us. It's something we hear in our discussions with a lot of the cloud vendors themselves. As you can see on the left here, the GenAI challenges customers are facing are really the data challenges. Again, not surprising, and it's pretty broad. It stems from trouble accessing the data, controlling the data, tying it back to data lineage, where it came from, and then of course the governance on top of it. We hear a lot about RAG too, getting RAG into actual production. That's a huge barrier, but it really stems back to the quality of the data that was used. So it's all coming back to the data architecture. And so the cloud vendors really valuing from a partner perspective, their ability to tell the data story and tie it to the GenAI story. I think that's becoming more important too, as we look at what the cloud vendors are doing from a product perspective, and that's really better integrating their services. They're rallying more and more around a unified data architecture and trying to serve the data lifecycle as more of a complete integrated solution. So double clicking on the partner aspect of it. So as you can see on the right hand of this slide, we asked customers where the GSIs were engaged, really in the high level pieces of the data lifecycle. So as you might expect, governance came out on top. Putting those frameworks and those policies in place was really a big one, but you also see a lot of involvement in the data architecture and establishing the foundation. I think that speaks to really the maturing ecosystem we're seeing. So an example there would be, if you look at what Microsoft Fabric is doing, a lot of ISVs are being embedded directly within the platform as part of, so they're really delivering their own workloads in their entirety. So Informatica is a good example there. So I think that dynamic is driving a lot of this opportunity. And then on the customer side, we're seeing it as well. When we talk to customers, they're starting to recognize more and more the importance of having that data foundation in place before they can take advantage of GenAI. So it's something we're seeing on the customer side as well. And one last call out on this data that you see here. So analytics came in a little bit lower. And I think there's a couple dynamics that could be playing a role. And one is kind of what I just mentioned, right? Which is the cloud vendors delivering more complete solutions, not disparate components. They're addressing more and more of the pipeline as part of a complete solution. So again, Microsoft Fabric is a really strong example based on what we're hearing from customers and how they're bringing all the data engineering and the analytics components in place, pulling from the data lake architecture as part of a solution. So when the SI partners go in, they're touching multiple different aspects. The other dynamic that could be playing a role is just the emergence of a lot of tier 2 or niche SIs playing a role in the analytics stack. And then, of course, there'll always be that dynamic of where the hyperscalers come in from a services perspective. These guys host the data. Again, they're encroaching more and more on the data estate. So I think you'll see that reflected in the professional services and engagement that they can offer as well. So hopefully that's a little bit of context around some of the data you see here, and we'll continue to update it and evaluate it as we continue to survey and discuss with customers. So just to kind of wrap up this data piece with a couple vendor examples, I threw around the term integrated and unified solution a lot. I won't talk about Microsoft Fabric because we have a lot of coverage and customer feedback on that solution if you're interested. But just giving mention to Google Cloud here as well. So obviously a strong association in data and analytics. When you look at what they're doing with BigQuery, they're unifying their governance. So that's Dataplex under the same BigQuery interface. So really a big push over there to deliver BigQuery as more of a unified product. And even Oracle, actually, they're making huge moves at the database layer, and that's a whole separate conversation for a different day. And that's pretty pervasive throughout our coverage as well. But they've really evolved their data lake strategy, and they just previewed what they call intelligent data lakes. So that's basically them re-architecting a lot of the OCI platform components. So that could be integration, cataloging. So really repackaging the core architecture of their analytics stack. And then on top of that, what will continue to be a differentiator, for Oracle is that they have all the data sitting in the Fusion, ERP, et cetera, that's on top of that. And it's not just the hyperscalers. Obviously, Databricks is a great example of a company and almost taking the reverse approach. So they were born into the data lake house. Now they're looking up the stack. They have their own BI tool, and it's not designed to compete with the established BI tools on the market. And in fact, they've opened up their API to partners so that Power BI and Tableau customers can still use those and still take advantage of what Databricks is providing, which is the ability to contextualize that data that's sitting within their platform. So those are just some examples of the vendor developments that we're tracking here at TBR, and how they're better integrating and asserting themselves in the ecosystem. So Boz, I'll hand it back to you for Q&A.
Thank you, Katie, and again, I appreciate both you and Alex chiming in here, because as I mentioned in the beginning, it's a joint effort on the TBR side, as many of you on the line know. Or if you don't know us, we start with a vendor-specific approach and the ecosystem intelligence research that we've been spearheading the last 3 years have been a joint effort, and they have allowed us and compelled us to kind of go beyond our typical kind of like approach of vendor-specific analysis, and that collaboration is as a result of those reports we'll be discussing today. And again, we have a lot more conversations with alliance managers, and our leadership is certainly has evolved along the way as a result of those reports. I'll leave it up for Q&A before if any kind of questions come through the line. As we wrap up the presentations, I want to kind of leave you with 3 big things as you're thinking about how to partner better, how to think as a partner. Essentially, that was kind of the title of the presentation today. So 3 main themes that we have observed, regardless of the workload, regardless of the industry, regardless of the technology area, the services area. There must be a top-down executive alignment, a joint vision, something that is driven by the executives in terms of like how you go to market. The second thing is joint investments at the portfolio level, at the training level of the resources, certifications, making sure that you have that understanding of like who's committing to how much and when. And last but not least, which I think is the most challenging, but even the most important, is knowledge management. Ensuring that your partners know your portfolio as well as you know it is so ever critical. And it's very hard because field salespeople have their goals and their tasks that they have to meet quotas for every quarter. So why would they be selling one technology versus the other? Why would be recommending one services provider over the other? So this is very challenging. But if you have the other two in place as a motion and it's well established, and common governance, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, and shared risk models and shared revenue models. And, these are some of the frameworks that can certainly help guide those and help with the knowledge management that is ever so important. So with that, kind of like wrapping up the presentations, I think I see any questions in the queue. One question here: do services providers see GenAI as a threat to their business model? That's a great question. So I think they are recognizing from the conversations we've been having with the services providers, with the partners, with the clients. I think there's a great recognition from all parties the potential threat of GenAI to each party's business model, right? I think the important aspect is how soon each one of those parties reacts to and adjusts and calibrates their business model, their sales motions, the staffing models. I mentioned earlier in the presentation how the staffing pyramids are starting to change, or at least being discussed to be changed. They haven't changed as much yet, but at least that's kind of on the drawing board, to put it that way. It's kind of the pyramid changing from traditional pyramid to more of an obelisk, and GenAI being kind of like wrapped around. Obviously, that's going to require more of a thinking around how do you commercialize your services, how do you industrialize service delivery, and what's your pricing model. It's one thing to pitch, well, using GenAI to clients, it's going to save you 35%, but then you're also on the hook to deliver those savings. And then also, how do you ensure those savings get back reinvested with you as the vendor? So there's a lot of moving pieces at the moment. I see that the more innovative and the more risk-taking vendors see it more as an opportunity. Vendors that have been in distress or confusion for their own internal strategy and who they are, I think that they might be the one that actually might be more threatened in certain aspects of the business. But I think it's as the technology evolves, business model will evolve. And again, the ones that are looking at and understanding how well they can play within their own swim lane, how deep they can go and lean on their core capabilities versus trying to do more and actually rely on partners when they're not known for. I think those are the more protected one versus the one that aspire to do more with in areas that are not known for, which can backfire with even more with a new technology like GenAI.